One joke, one rooftop, 1 second that changed everything he thought he knew about second chances. She didn't laugh, because somewhere behind her eyes, a door she'd locked 5 years ago just creaked open. Without a single word, she led him somewhere she had never let anyone go before. What he found in that room had nothing to do with romance prance, and everything to do with a truth she'd never told a single soul. A careless joke became a lifelong promise kept, and proof that some doors are only locked until the right person finally knocks.
If you have ever said something you didn't mean just to survive an awkward moment, you already know how fast one careless joke can rewrite a person's entire life. Before you keep reading, hit that like button and subscribe, because this story is about to show you exactly how far one joke can go, and what happens when the person you said it to takes it more seriously than you ever imagined. My name doesn't matter yet. What matters is the day I turned to my boss in front of 40 of our coworkers and said, "Marry me," as a joke. She didn't laugh. She looked at me the way you look at a locked door you've been standing in front of for years, wondering if today is finally the day someone knocks the right way. 3 days later, she called me to her house, opened the door without a word, and walked me straight to her bedroom. What I found there had nothing to do with romance, and everything to do with the truth neither of us had said out loud. Stay with me, because by the end of this story, you'll understand why some jokes are really just fear wearing a smile. Ethan Cole was 34 years old and had learned, the hard way, that grief doesn't leave when the funeral ends. It just moves into the house with you and starts paying rent. 3 years earlier, his wife Sarah had died in a car accident on a rainy October night, leaving him alone with a 6-year-old daughter named Lily and a mortgage he could barely keep up with on a web marketing coordinator's salary. Ethan didn't fall apart, not in the dramatic way people imagine when they hear a story like this. He fell apart quietly, in the 15 minutes before Lily woke up each morning, in the driver's seat of his car outside her school, in the space between finishing the dishes and finally allowing himself to sit down. Then he would put himself back together, because Lily needed a father who could braid hair badly but with love, who could make pancakes shaped like nothing recognizable, and who could show up every single day like the ground beneath her hadn't shifted at all. He worked at Whitfield Marketing Group, a mid-sized firm in downtown Chicago that specialized in rebranding struggling local businesses. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was steady, and steady was everything to a single father raising a daughter on his own. His boss was Claire Whitfield, the founder's daughter who had taken over the company 2 years earlier after her father's health forced him into retirement. Claire was 36, sharp as a blade in meetings, and colder than the Chicago wind in December to anyone who tried to get close to her personally. The office had theories about her. Some said she'd been engaged once, and it ended badly. Some said she simply didn't believe in relationships, that she'd built her entire identity around the company the way some people build a wall, brick by brick, until they forget there was not ever a door. Ethan didn't have theories. He had deadlines, a daughter's school pickup schedule, and absolutely no time to wonder about his boss's love life. Their working relationship was professional, occasionally tense during campaign deadlines, and entirely uneventful for the better part of 2 years. Claire respected Ethan's work ethic. She'd noticed, in the quiet way people notice things they don't comment on, that he left at exactly 5:15 every day without fail, that he never complained about it, and that his work was somehow still better than half the teams who stayed until 8. She didn't ask why. She assumed, correctly, that there was a story behind it, and she made a point of never prying, because she understood better than anyone what it felt like to have people prying into the parts of your life you'd rather keep locked. The turning point came at the company's 5th anniversary party, held in the rooftop lounge of a hotel near the Chicago River. Ethan hadn't wanted to go. He never wanted to go to these things, not because he disliked his coworkers, but because every event without Lily felt like borrowed time he wasn't sure he should be spending. But his sister Rachel had insisted on watching Lily for the night, practically shoving him out the door with the words, "You're allowed to have one night, Ethan. Sarah would want that for you." He went, wearing the one good blazer he owned, feeling like an imposter in his own life. The party was in full swing by the time Ethan found himself standing near the open bar with 3 co-workers, half listening to a conversation about the company's next big campaign pitch. Claire arrived an hour later than everyone else, as she usually did, dressed simply in black, looking like she'd rather be anywhere else but carrying herself like she owned the room regardless. Someone made a toast. Champagne was poured. And then, in the loose, unguarded atmosphere that alcohol and celebration create, one of the account managers, a loud, well-meaning man named Derek, raised his glass toward Claire and Ethan standing near each other and said, half joking, "You two should just get married and save the company." The drama of hiring a wedding planner for the office pool. There was laughter, the kind that dies quickly when it realizes it's standing on thin ice. Ethan, trying to smooth over the awkwardness the way he always did, trying to make a joke land before it became a moment, turned to Claire with a grin and said the words that would change everything. "Yeah, Claire, marry me. I promise I'll still hit every deadline." He said it lightly, the way you'd say something to diffuse a room, the way you'd throw a joke into silence, because silence felt more dangerous than laughter. Claire didn't laugh. She looked at him, and for exactly 3 seconds, Ethan would replay those 3 seconds in his mind for days afterward. Something moved behind her eyes that had nothing to do with humor. It wasn't offense. It wasn't amusement. It was something closer to recognition, like she'd heard those exact words before, in a different voice, under very different circumstances. And hearing them again had knocked loose a memory she'd spent years trying to keep buried. Then, just as quickly, she smiled the practiced, professional smile she used in client meetings, said, "I'll have my assistant check my calendar," and turned to greet someone else, leaving Ethan standing there with the distinct, uncomfortable feeling that he had said something far heavier than he intended. He told himself it was nothing. People joke at office parties. Nobody actually gets married because of a rooftop toast and too much champagne. He went home that night, kissed a sleeping Lily on the forehead, thanked his sister, and went to bed telling himself the whole thing would be forgotten by Monday morning. It was not forgotten by Monday morning. Claire Whitfield was, by every account Ethan had ever heard, a woman who compartmentalized her emotions the way other people organized filing cabinets, everything labeled, everything in its place, nothing left out where it could be seen by accident. But Ethan's joke had done something no client complaint, no failed campaign, no boardroom argument had managed to do in 2 years. It had reached past the filing cabinet and pulled out a folder she'd sealed shut a long time ago. 5 years before that rooftop party, Claire had been engaged to a man named Michael Reyes, an architect she'd met during her father's retirement gala. They'd been together for 3 years, and Michael had proposed the same way Ethan had joked, casually, at a party, in front of friends, laughing as he said, "So I guess we should just get married," during a conversation about their future. Except Michael had meant it as a real proposal disguised as a joke, a way of testing the waters before doing it properly, and Claire had said yes, laughing, thinking they'd figure out the real proposal and ring later. 2 months after that, Michael was diagnosed with an aggressive form of pancreatic cancer. He died 11 months later, 3 weeks before what would have been their wedding date. Claire had spent every day since then building walls so high around that particular grief that even she sometimes forgot it was there, until something, a phrase, a laugh, a joke at a rooftop party, reached over the wall and touched it directly. She hadn't dated anyone seriously in the 5 years since. She'd told herself it was because she was building the company, because her father needed her, because there simply wasn't time. The truth, which she rarely allowed herself to examine, was that she was afraid of hearing those words again and having them mean something, afraid of what it would feel like to lose someone twice in one lifetime. When Ethan said "marry me" as a joke on that rooftop, it wasn't the joke that hurt. It was how much, for one unguarded second, she had wanted it to be real. The following Tuesday, Claire called Ethan into her office at the end of the day, after most of the staff had gone home. Ethan walked in, expecting a conversation about the Hartwell campaign deadline, notepad in hand, prepared to talk numbers. Instead, Claire was standing by the window, looking out over the city, and she didn't turn around right away. "I owe you an explanation for how I reacted Friday night," she said finally. Ethan set his notepad down slowly. "You don't owe me anything, Claire. It was a stupid joke. I shouldn't have said it in front of everyone. That's not why I'm bringing it up." She turned to face him now, and there was something in her expression Ethan had never seen in 2 years of working under her. Not the composed executive mask, but something rawer, more tired, more human. "I was engaged once. His name was Michael. He died before we could get married." She said it plainly, without asking for sympathy, the way you state a fact you've said so many don't. times in your own head that it no longer has edges that can cut you when it comes out of your mouth. When you said those words Friday, it wasn't the joke. It was that for 1 second, I forgot to be afraid of them. Ethan didn't know what to say. He'd spent 3 years learning that when someone hands you their grief like that, the worst thing you can do is try to fix it with words. So instead of saying something clumsy about being sorry, he said, "I lost my wife 3 years ago. Car accident. I have a daughter, Lily. She's 9 now." He'd never told Claire this directly, not because it was a secret, but because grief, in his experience, wasn't something you led with in professional settings. "I understand a little bit about being afraid of things you used to want." Something shifted in the room after that. Not romance, not yet. Just recognition, the specific kind that only exists between two people who have both stood at the edge of the same particular cliff and looked down. They talked for almost 2 hours that evening, well past when the office cleaning crew came through. About Sarah, about Michael, about Lily's stubborn refusal to eat anything green, about the business Claire had built to keep her hands busy so her mind wouldn't wander toward everything she'd lost. It was the first real conversation they'd ever had, 2 years into working together, and it left Ethan walking to his car that night, feeling like he'd been led into a room in someone's house that had been locked for a very long time. Over the following weeks, something quietly began to change. Claire started asking about Lily. Small questions at first, whether she liked school, what her favorite subject was, and Ethan found himself looking forward to those questions more than he wanted to admit. Claire began staying a little later some evenings, not because deadlines demanded it, but because the conversations with Ethan had become something she didn't want to rush past. They never called it anything. There was no dramatic declaration, no sudden office romance the way people whispered about at the coffee machine. It was slower than that, quieter, built out of shared grief turning gradually into shared understanding, and understanding turning, almost without either of them noticing, into something warmer. 6 weeks after that rooftop party, Claire invited Ethan to her house for dinner, ostensibly to discuss a new client proposal that genuinely did need reviewing, though both of them understood by then that the proposal was only half the reason for the invitation. Ethan arranged for Rachel to watch Lily again, feeling a flutter of nervousness he hadn't felt in years, the specific nervousness of a man who has forgotten how to want something for himself and is relearning it slowly, like a language he used to speak fluently. Claire's house was smaller than Ethan expected for someone who ran a successful company. A converted brownstone with warm lighting and shelves full of books that looked red rather than decorative. They ate dinner, talked about the client proposal for exactly as long as professionalism required, and then let the conversation drift into easier territory, the way it always did now. At some point, Claire grew quiet, staring at her wine glass, turning it slowly between her fingers. "There's something I want to show you," she said. "I haven't shown anyone. Not my father, not my closest friends. I don't know why I want to show you, except that you're the only person who'd ever said something to me that made the wall feel less like a wall." She stood, and Ethan followed her without a word, up the narrow staircase of the brownstone, down a hallway lined with framed photographs of a life Ethan didn't fully know yet, and stopped in front of a closed door at the end of the hall. Claire's hand rested on the doorknob for a long moment before she opened it and stepped back, letting Ethan see inside without following him in. It was a bedroom, unused, untouched, exactly as it must have looked 5 years earlier. A wedding dress hung in a garment bag against the closet door, the plastic slightly yellowed with time. On the dresser sat a framed photograph of Claire, younger, laughing, standing beside a man Ethan assumed was Michael, both of them looking at each other instead of the camera. There were unopened wedding invitations stacked neatly in a box on the bed, envelopes that had never been sent because the wedding they were meant to announce had never happened. The room smelled faintly of dust and cedar, like a place that had been sealed against time itself. "I couldn't get rid of any of it," Claire said quietly from the doorway. "I couldn't move it, couldn't donate the dress, couldn't throw away the invitations. Every year I told myself this would be the year I finally cleared it out. And every year I just closed the door instead. I haven't been able to bring anyone up here. Not because I thought they'd judge me, but because bringing someone into this room felt like admitting the door could actually open again." She paused, and her voice, usually so controlled in every meeting Ethan had ever sat through, wavered for the first time. "When you said marry me, as a joke, I realized I'd spent 5 years so afraid of hearing those words mean something again that I forgot what it felt like to want them to." Ethan stood in the doorway of that room for a long time, understanding now why she'd led him there without a word. Because some truths are too fragile to survive being spoken aloud before someone has actually seen them. He didn't say anything comforting or rehearsed. He simply said, "Thank you for showing me," and reached for her hand, and she let him hold it. Standing at the threshold of a room that had been closed for 5 years, finally letting a small, uncertain light in. That night didn't end in some sweeping cinematic declaration of love. It ended with Claire making tea, the two of them sitting on her back porch talking until nearly midnight about the small, unglamorous mechanics of grief. How you keep going. How you let people in without feeling like you're betraying the people you lost. How love after loss isn't a replacement for what came before, but something that can exist alongside it. Carefully, patiently, without erasing anything. Ethan drove home that night with a feeling in his chest he hadn't allowed himself in 3 years. Something dangerously close to hope, and he sat outside his own house for 10 minutes before going in, just breathing, just letting himself feel it without immediately building a wall around it the way Claire had built hers. The months that followed were not without their difficulties. Claire struggled, more than once, with the guilt of moving forward, calling Ethan late one night in tears after finally donating Michael's old jacket, the last thing of his she'd kept in her closet, feeling like she was erasing him even though she knew, somewhere underneath the grief, that she wasn't. Ethan struggled too, particularly the day Lily asked him directly over breakfast, with the blunt honesty only a 9-year-old possesses, whether he was going to marry his boss, and whether that meant she'd get a new mom, a question that sent him into a quiet panic about moving too fast, about what Lily needed versus what he wanted, about whether it was fair to introduce more change into a life that had already survived one earthquake. He brought this fear to Claire honestly, the way their entire relationship had been built on honesty rather than performance. "I don't want Lily to feel like anyone is replacing her mom," he told her one evening. "I don't ever want that room in your house to feel like it's being replaced either. I think we're both scared of the same thing from different directions." Claire had thought about this carefully before answering, the way she thought through every important decision in her life. "I don't think either of those rooms needs to be replaced," she said finally. "Sarah's room in Lily's heart, Michael's room in mine. I think we just build a new room next to them, not instead of. Next to." It was, Ethan realized, the most honest way anyone had ever described what it meant to love again after loss. And it was Claire, careful, guarded, wall-building Claire, who had finally found the words for it. Ethan introduced Claire to Lily slowly, over several weekends, starting with simple things, a trip to the park, an ice cream outing, nothing that carried the weight of a formal introduction. Lily, it turned out, adored Claire almost immediately, drawn to the quiet, careful way Claire Secchi listened to her ramble about her favorite books and her ongoing feud with a classmate named Madison over the class hamster's feeding schedule. Claire, who had spent 5 years building emotional distance from everyone around her, found herself utterly disarmed by a 9-year-old's unfiltered honesty, by the way Lily would simply climb onto the couch next to her and start talking without any of the careful negotiation adults required. There was one Saturday afternoon, about 4 months into all of this, that Ethan would remember for the rest of his life, though nothing dramatic happened in it at all. He'd gone to pick up dry cleaning, leaving Lily and Claire alone at the kitchen table with a box of watercolors Claire had bought on a whim, and when he came back, he stood in the doorway for a full minute before either of them noticed him, watching Claire carefully help Lily mix the exact shade of blue she wanted for a picture of the ocean, but happy. Listening to Claire ask Lily thoughtful questions about why happy oceans needed a different blue than sad ones, taking the question as seriously as she'd take a client's $1 million campaign brief. It was such a small, unremarkable moment, and it was in that unremarkable moment, more than any grand conversation about grief or any late-night confession in an unused bedroom, that Ethan understood he wasn't just falling for Claire. He was watching his daughter fall for her too, in the slow, trusting way children do when an adult finally proves, through nothing but consistency, that they are safe to love. Rachel, Ethan's sister, was cautiously protective when he first told her about Claire, the way any sibling who has watched someone survive unimaginable loss becomes protective of what comes next. She asked hard questions over coffee, whether Ethan was doing this because he was lonely, whether he'd actually grieved Sarah or simply buried the grief under a new relationship, whether Lily's needs were being centered in all of this the way they should be. Ethan didn't resent the questions. He'd asked himself most of them already, lying awake some nights running through every possible way this could go wrong. But watching Rachel meet Claire for the first time, watching the two of them talk for nearly 3 hours at Ethan's kitchen table about everything from the marketing industry to grief support groups to Lily's stubborn hatred of broccoli, he saw something in his sister's face soften into genuine relief. The specific relief of someone realizing the person their brother chose wasn't running from anything, but building towards something with both eyes open. The workplace, predictably, had opinions long before Ethan and Claire made anything official. Co-workers noticed Claire staying later on the evenings Ethan had late meetings, noticed the two of them walking to the parking garage together more often than coincidence could explain, noticed a softness in Claire's demeanor in client meetings that'd been there 2 years earlier. Nobody said anything directly, out of respect or fear or simple office etiquette, until Derek, incapable as ever of reading a room, announced at a Friday afternoon meeting that he's started a betting pool on when Ethan and Claire would finally make it official, a comment that earned him a look from Claire so withering that he apologized 4 separate times before betting as the meeting ended. Ethan and Claire had laughed about it privately that same evening, both of them realizing that whatever they had built over the past several months had become obvious enough that even Derek, who once mistook the office's fire alarm test for an actual emergency drill and evacuated the entire building over a bagel that burned in the break room toaster, could see it clearly. A year after that rooftop party, where a nervous joke had cracked open 2 locked doors at once, Ethan proposed to Claire, for real this time, quietly, at her house, in the backyard where they'd first talked honestly about grief, without an audience, without a joke to hide behind. He didn't kneel with a rehearsed speech. He simply told her that he didn't want to build his new room next to anyone else, and asked if she'd let him build his family's next chapter beside hers. Claire said yes without a single second of the fear that had haunted her 5 years earlier, because somewhere in the last year, without either of them fully noticing when it happened, the fear had quietly moved out and made room for something steadier. They were married the following spring, in a small ceremony in Claire's backyard, the same backyard where the real conversations had happened, with Lily as the flower girl, scattering petals with the same fierce concentration she brought to every important task in her 9-year-old life. Rachel cried through the entire ceremony, insisting afterward it was allergies, though nobody at the reception believed her for a second. Ethan's father-in-law from his first marriage, Sarah's father, quietly took Ethan aside during the reception and told him that Sarah would have liked Claire, that she would have appreciated a woman who didn't try to erase her from Lily's, Sarah's life, but instead asked Lily questions about her mother with real curiosity, wanting to understand the woman whose absence had shaped the little girl she was growing to love. It was, Ethan would say later, one of the kindest things anyone said to him that entire year, and it settled something in his chest that had been quietly unsettled since the day he first said yes to loving again. Claire finally cleared out that upstairs bedroom the week before the wedding, not with grief, but with something closer to gratitude, donating the dress to a charity that helped young women who couldn't afford one of their own, keeping only the photograph of Michael on a small shelf downstairs where she could see it, without the room around it feeling frozen in time. The room became Lily's, painted a soft yellow at Lily's insistence, filled with books and the particular chaos of a 9-year-old's imagination, a space that had once been sealed shut by grief, now filled with the ordinary, beautiful noise of a child's laughter. Derek, the account manager whose careless toast had started the whole thing, liked to remind everyone at the office, for years afterward, that he was technically responsible for the entire relationship, a claim Ethan and Claire allowed him to make because it made him so genuinely happy and cost them nothing to indulge. The truth, though, the one only Ethan and Claire really understood, was that it hadn't been the joke that mattered. It had been what the joke revealed. 2 people who had each spent years standing guard over a locked door, so afraid of what it would mean to open it again that they had forgotten a door can also let something in, not just something out. If there is a lesson in Ethan and Claire's story, it is this: grief does not disqualify you from love, and love does not require you to forget what came before it. The bravest thing either of them ever did wasn't falling for each other. It was choosing, deliberately and honestly, to open a door they had spent years convinced should stay closed forever, and discovering that what waited on the other side wasn't a betrayal of anything they'd lost, but a continuation of everything they still had left to give. Somewhere in Chicago tonight, in a house with a converted brownstone bedroom now painted soft yellow, a single dad's careless joke has become a family's quiet, ordinary, extraordinary life. And it all started with 3 words, said as a joke, that turned out to be the truest thing either of them had said in years. If this story moved you even a little, make sure you're subscribed, because there are so many more stories like Ethan and Claire's, this waiting for you. Stories about the doors we're afraid to open, and what we find when we finally do. Thank you for watching until the very end.